So, I don't know if I've made my stance clear in videos past, but, the Eighth Doctor is kind of my doctor. Well, I said I was going to start doing these random episode spotlights, but I decided to take the random out of the equation and actually start off doing these autobiographically. I can't think of any place better to start than the TV movie starring Paul McGann in his one solo full-length outing as the Eighth Doctor. One day I was sitting on the computer at about 10 cents a minute for about an hour. Dad really loved me. And I got a call from my brother telling me that there's this movie that's going to be airing on the Fox Tuesday night movie, and I was going, well, what's it called? It's called Doctor Who. And I was like, wait a minute, wasn't that show with the creepy theme song that aired after Sesame Street on PBS? And he's like, yeah, that's the one where they're doing a movie of it. And I'm like, okay, fine. Well, he told me to record it. I did, so as not to incur his wrath. And very gradually, as I was on the computer, all of a sudden I started hearing things about a Time Lord having 13 lives. All of a sudden I'm seeing this stout looking older gent in a big gothic fortress, and then random cuts to a blue phone booth floating around the circuits of time, and here I'm going like, is this a Bill and Ted ripoff? Very gradually, as we're watching the Seventh Doctor die on a slab and then ultimately regenerate into Paul McGann, needless to say, I was absolutely transfixed, and I followed it all along, all the way to the dead end, and by the end of it, I was rabid. I needed to have more of it. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. I guess you could say I was an American in the wilderness. The TV movie was the brainchild of producer Philip Siegel, who worked for Amblin Entertainment. He, like a lot of people, was absolutely distraught over the cancellation of Doctor Who in 1989, and he was in a position where he was able to negotiate a deal between Amblin Entertainment and the BBC in an effort to try and get the show back in one form or another. He was talking about getting a movie made. He was talking with different networks about the idea of getting the show revived with the help of American TV. And in the 90s, science fiction was actually making some strides in the wake of the X-Files, and of course there was a whole bunch of other science fiction shows popping up, particularly on Fox. Aside from X-Files, there were shows like Sliders, there was Briscoe County Jr., there was even shows like Mantis. Fox was actually trying to experiment with the genre, and that seemed to be the ideal network in order to get Doctor Who brought back. Well, in the early drafts of the script, oh man, if you actually go on this particular DVD and look up some of the behind the scenes, there were some snippets of Paul McGann doing his screen test, and the script in question was, well, let's face it, it was pretty damn insane. They took a lot of the mystery out of it. They ended up focusing on the Doctor in his early days in Gallifrey, and the fact that he leaves Gallifrey in order to find his missing father. And yeah, that was exactly what Doctor Who was all about. Suffice to say, that early draft did not work out, and if you really want to be embarrassed, take a look at what the Daleks were supposed to look like. No. So inevitably, in the development process, they decided, you know what, let's just pick up where we left off. Let's have Sylvester McCoy come back and pass the torch on to Paul McGann. Even before Paul McGann was cast, a load of actors were up for the role. Tim Curry was up for the part. I even heard whispers that Alan Rickman may have been up for the Master, or even the Doctor. That's possible, and it would have been kind of awesome. Anthony Stewart Head, and even probably one of the most macabre choices, but obviously considered to cater to the American demographic. They even talked about David Hasselhoff possibly taking on the role, and of course they said no. Paul McGann was the top choice, and he was riding high in the wake of his success with films like Withnail and I, and he even popped up for Fox in Alien 3. And he seemed to be the right man for the job. And if you even look at the screen test, he had this wonderful coif of hair, only to their horror to discover that for a role he did later on, he had to shave it off. Paul McGann, even to this day, regrets that decision because he hated the wig he had to wear when he filmed. It aired on a Tuesday night in, I believe, April of 1996, and unfortunately they decided to air it the same night as a vital episode of Roseanne. Unfortunately, Roseanne won. and Doctor Who did not get picked up to series. And for myself, who had this brush with inspiration, I was very, very sad. What happened next? That is a story I'm going to save for a later spotlight. But in the meantime, let us focus on the TV movie as it is. Sylvester McCoy, when he got cast, was absolutely overjoyed by the prospect of getting the chance to come back and pass the torch on to Paul McGann. Sylvester McCoy does regret this decision because he felt that because the movie spent a lot of time focusing on him dying and ultimately regenerating, unfortunately Paul McGann did not get a chance to stretch his legs and shine as much as he should have. Because as any old school Doctor Who fan knows, and even now some new school fans will know, the Doctor usually post-regeneration has a hard time adjusting. He has his usual quirks. In the Eighth Doctor's case, he spends a lot of it as an amnesiac, having a hard time knowing who he is, trying to figure out who he is, and spending a lot of time wrestling with that. So you don't really get the full force of what Paul McGann's Doctor does until halfway through the movie, and that really leads to the big problem with the TV movie. Philip Segal, unfortunately, thought that the best way to get new fans in is to throw them in the deep end, hit them over the head with all this information, which had the inverse effect. This idea landed with very few people, myself included, but for the mass majority, they felt like they should have been doing some studying before they watched this movie, and that was probably not the best way. Really, how is the best way to do it? The debut episode, An Unearthly Child, and of course the debut of the new series, Rose. Instead of focusing on the Doctor at the beginning, they decide to focus on a much more relatable character and follow them into the TARDIS, and in turn onto the Doctor's adventures. That was the best way to do it. Unearthly Child focused on Ian and Barbara, Rose followed on Rose. That was the best way to go, and that's why the new series kicked off with a bang, because the audience had someone they could click with. TV movie, not so much. But that's not to say that there isn't a lot to love about the TV movie. Like I said, the ideas that were being thrown at me were all stuff that I just was absolutely agog about. I just absolutely was enthralled by everything I was seeing. Fortunately, the major factor which really sold me on it was the fact that Paul McGann was absolutely wonderful. And even for the small amount of time he had to show what he could do as the Doctor, he still got a chance to show what he could do as the Doctor because he was absolutely joyous. He was whimsical, he had a very light romantic edge, but at the same time had a very serious tone. So he was able to alternate between the fun-spirited nature of the character and the adventurous spirit. And even though a lot of the action in this TV movie, you could safely say, was trying to pander to the American crowd, it still had this old-school adventurous feeling about it, because it wasn't about the Doctor jumping in, guns blazing, killing everything in sight. No, it was about him trying to outwit a nemesis. It was about him on a race against time. It was about him trying to save the world with as little collateral damage as possible. And the thing you gotta bear in mind with science fiction in America at the time, before anyone really was cognizant of the existence of Doctor Who, our staple science fiction was Star Trek. It was Star Wars. And what's the thing that both those have in common? War. It's about a federation. It's about military factions. It's about pretty much going in guns blazing with the romantic pretty boy hero, just going in, destroying things, all for the greater good. Shut it! But here is a hero character who actually is all about the finer things in life, who wants to stop and smell the roses, who marvels at just the beauty of existence. And that was something that I had never, ever seen before. And Paul McGann's performance encapsulates that perfectly. All these little things on the side where he assures everyone he sees that they are going to do amazing things, in particular the character of Grace. I actually think Grace Holloway is a severely underrated character, and it's sad that her character is tied up in red tape because of Universal, that we can never get a chance to follow up on her character and see where they could have taken her afterwards. She had a beautiful arc in this story, and her back and forth with the Eighth Doctor, even if the romantic side of it is extremely forced, is still a lot of fun. She's actually kind of a gutsy character, and they do a great job establishing why she would actually be a fun character to travel with, and she has a great no-nonsense attitude, and definitely considerably more mature than a lot of companions that have come before, and definitely a lot that have come since. Of course, in order to sell things to Americans, they always have to throw in an American, well, quote-unquote celebrity. Well, that's where Eric Roberts comes in. Now, Eric Roberts, he is something of a controversial star in a lot of people's eyes. He has done a lot of good, he's done a lot of bad. He has a penchant for playing things extremely over the top, and this performance is no exception. I know a lot of people really don't like Eric Roberts as the Master. Some consider him a little too dark, a little too brutal. Some pretty much are off the boat at the second he comes in.
I always dress for the occasion.
And I won't lie, for me he was going strong until that moment. It's kind of a tone-deaf execution on the Master, but there are elements to him which work. And I will say Eric Roberts still looks like he's having a grand old time. And I will say I did like this bond that was formed between him and the juvenile delinquent Chang Li, played very efficiently and very effectively by Yi Ji-so. And actually, I will say another thing that made me sad was the fact that we didn't get a chance to see where he went afterwards. There was setups for really good companions here, and had the show gone to series, we probably would have seen them again. We probably would have seen where their characters could have gone. And it's just a damn shame. There's a lot of factors which I know hardcore fans at the time did not like. First off, a lot of people didn't like a lot of the action. That I actually debate. There's an entire era of a Doctor where his whole leitmotif was all about him jumping on motorcycles, doing Venusian Aikido, you know, driving helicopters, driving fancy cars. He was a Doctor of action. So don't you dare tell me that all this action was not in the spirit of Doctor Who. Don't even try. Don't even try. Well, the other thing, which was extremely controversial at the time, but nowadays, with the progression of things, now it seems very tame by comparison, was the famous kiss. Prior to this, the idea that the Doctor could ever get intimate with a companion was an alien concept. When I started getting into the show, I actually questioned why people were getting all crazy about it. I'm like, well, guys, he does have a granddaughter. He has, at one point or another, gotten Swifty. And it just seemed extremely weird that people were getting all up in arms about it. And even then, if you watch the scene where he lays that kiss upon her, the scene plays like he's just really stoked and enthusiastic that he got his memories back. If no one was around, he probably would have kissed the nearby stray dog that might have been walking by. He would have been just so happy to remember who he was. There's nothing about it that felt lecherous, and even the final kiss at the end of the movie feels more like a pleasant goodbye as opposed to anything romantic. Yeah, sure, Grace says, you know, I meet the right guys from another planet, but there's nothing saying that I love you. No, not at all. It's much ado about nothing, particularly in the grand scheme. But the other thing I have to rave about this movie, a lot of it does represent the best of Doctor Who, and it does actually kick off a lot of things which are now pretty commonplace in the show afterwards. First off, the production value of this thing is through the damn roof. The visual effects, even by today's standards, on a television budget, are exceptional. But I gotta say, even to this day, this is still my favorite TARDIS interior. Look at this thing. This is a full-blown Jules Verne paradise right here. And I think my favorite thing about it is that it reflects the history. This looks like it's been lived in for centuries, and it looks like the Doctor has lived here. You look around, and yeah, you could say it's fan-wakey because you see all these little Easter eggs of all the stuff in the series past, but the point is, a person who has been dwelling in this TARDIS for, at this point, probably 800 years, yeah, he's gonna just leave shit lying around, and he's gonna want to make sure that it's nice and cozy. I was just so amazed by the design of it. Even to this day, I do enjoy a lot of the designs of the TARDIS to come. I will say Matt Smith's first TARDIS interior is still one of my favorites, but in the end, I just love Paul McGann's the most because you feel like there's a history. And I feel like we haven't really, the closest I think we got to reflecting that was when Peter Capaldi touched up the TARDIS interior. For a lot of people, the TV movie was not the return that they had hoped for, but for myself, who had just stumbled upon it, and was absolutely enthralled by all the concepts that were being laid down, I just couldn't help but fall in love with every single minute of this TV movie, even for all of its glaring flaws. I just did not care. Even with the Doctor saying he's half human, that's not the first time Doctor Who has thrown ideas that pretty much fall by the wayside. You don't question it. The TV movie will have a special place in my heart, and Paul McGann's Doctor even more so. And the thing I always tell new series fans is that if you want to start leaning into the classic series, use the TV movie as a nice bridge to segue into it, because it has the good production value, so you have that as a security blanket, but there is a nice old school feel to it that feels like more hand in hand with the classic series. Suffice to say, it made a fan of me, and that is why we're here today, and that is why I have invested my time and my love into Doctor Who. And that is why, continuing on Narcotic Casserole, I am going to keep talking about Doctor Who, and I'm going to talk about many episodes, whether they be new, whether they be classic. So for the future, what other episodes of Doctor Who would you like me to talk about? Leave it all in the comments below. And for more addictive content on Narcotic Casserole, simply like, share, subscribe, click, thou shalt be served.